In the void beyond the Virgo outer rim, where star maps turn speculative and AI cartographers erase their own calculations out of fear, an anomaly pulsed on subsector KZ-89. The last signal came from the Dioscuri, a stealth-class recon frigate dispatched by the Coalition's Deep Space Division, never meant to be found, never meant to fail. It was the kind of mission wrapped in 10 layers of classification, spoken only in corridors without cameras. That quadrant was deemed unreachable, not due to distance or warp interference, but because of what lived or didn't beyond it. The region had no light signatures, no planetary motion, no radio dust. Just silence. But something moved in the dark. I was part of a second-wave crew aboard the Exegesis, tasked with recovery and containment. Our orders were simple: enter the quadrant, locate the Dioscuri, assess the threat, and retrieve the black box or destroy it if necessary. But deep down, none of us believed it was that simple. The Dioscuri was equipped with failsafes strong enough to implode a small moon if it still existed. It meant something stronger decided it should. As we approached, we noticed the anomaly wasn't just a structure, it was a living complex, miles wide, orbiting a neutron star that shouldn't exist. It breathed, pulsated, reacted to our scanners, and emitted no reflections. We called it the chamber. Every simulation model refused to analyze its geometry. Algorithms broke apart. Codes mutated in real time. As we neared docking range, our ship lights dimmed, not from power loss, but as if something absorbed light selectively. The crew grew tense. I watched Lieutenant Eris mutter ancient prayers in languages predating Earth's alphabets. The silence was no longer empty, it was sentient. As we locked onto the Dioscuri's transponder buried deep inside that massive construct, we heard something. Not static. Not noise. But a frequency that mimicked breathing ours. Exactly ours. Every crew member's respiratory pattern copied and looped, layered back into the ship's systems. It had already reached inside before we ever made contact. The base didn't just detect us, it welcomed us. The air inside the shaft was not air in any breathable sense, it had weight, memory, resistance. It clung to Rourke's suit like liquid thought, pressing against every joint as if testing him. The descent craft had lost signal the moment it crossed the shaft's midpoint, its systems dimming into a passive state, not disabled, but muted, as though the very concept of machinery had been politely rejected. He had to override the manual hatch, and even then, the door didn't so much open as dematerialize. When his boots touched the corridor floor, it didn't echo. There was no reverb, no environmental feedback. The floor absorbed vibration. The walls absorbed light. And yet, he could see. See shapes that hadn't been lit, carvings that weren't etched but extruded, like thoughts pushed through geometry. The tunnel stretched forward in. Not with eyes, but with everything else. A galaxy once drowned in war. A species that did not speak but agreed every decision reached not through hierarchy, but resonance. A civilization so advanced it decided not to ascend, but to hide within planets like this, deep within geometry and silence. They didn't build these structures. They became them. They uploaded, encoded, embedded themselves in artificial caverns lined with memory-reactive mineral, waiting until something or someone bore the error they once feared would destroy them. Rourke was that error. Not biologically, not genetically, but cognitively. His brain, laced with fragmented proto-symbology from ancient Martian ruins, contained a recursive flaw, an interpretive loop that the others, long ago, had sealed away. But he had brought it here. Carried it unknowingly. And now, the system wanted it unlocked. The artifact lifted, spinning slowly as the shard disassembled midair into orbiting fragments, each piece aligning with patterns in his neural cortex. The pain was not pain. It was conversion. His past was being rewritten not with lies, but with revelations. He hadn't come here by chance. The coordinates weren't discovered. They were planted. Centuries ago. Possibly longer. And through him, the Obsidian Core would speak again. The Sentinels spoke once more. The language not vocal, but gravitational. Every syllable a shift in perception. You are the echo of the fracture. And echoes return to origin. Rourke screamed. Or thought he did. He walked forward, though forward had lost meaning. The corridor didn't follow geometry, angles folded into loops, gravity reset with each step, and the further Rourke moved, the more he suspected he wasn't walking through space, but through time. Every surface whispered soft pulses like memories encoded into metal. The walls bled holograms. Scenes of star systems being born in reverse, fleets spiraling inward toward extinction, celestial libraries collapsing into coded spheres. They weren't messages meant for interpretation. They were exhalations, fragments of thought from entities too vast to compress into symbols. As he passed, some of the holograms turned to follow him. Others recoiled. It wasn't clear if they recognized him as savior or mistake. Rourke could feel his own thoughts unraveling, not from damage, but from accommodation. His mind was expanding, pushed outward like lungs filling with vacuum. He remembered things he'd never lived, planets he never visited, stars that had no names in any Terran language. He touched a panel along the corridor, and it rippled under his glove like water trapped in memory. A pulse shot upward, and the floor beneath him liquefied, not melting, but rearranging. He sank not downward, but inward. The corridor folded again, revealing a new chamber. A colossal vault filled with columns of light. Atop each column floated a neural cocoon, suspended pods humming with ancestral thought. Inside the transparent shells, their WER. The vault was a prison. Or a council. Or both. At the center hovered a black monolith cracked down the center, dripping with anti-light. The fracture pulsed with each of Rourke's thoughts. He understood now. This was not an alien base in the classic sense. It was a fallback chamber for a supercivilization, one that encoded itself into sentient architecture to escape a virus of perception. A concept, once born among them, that spread like a thought plague, eroding certainty, corrupting agreement, unbinding their unified will. That virus was recursive interpretation, the idea that thought itself could question its own foundation endlessly. A loop with no escape. They had sealed themselves here to prevent it from spreading. But somehow, somewhere, the code leaked. It embedded in ancient Martian artifacts. It traveled with probes. It reached Earth. It reached Rourke. And now he'd brought it home. The monolith cracked wider as he approached. Inside it, he saw flashes. His own face morphing into those of the council, a reflection echoing backward through millennia. The figures around him did not move. They did not need to. Their presence was total. They were waiting to be overwritten, replaced by the one who unknowingly bore the final sequence. And then, from the monolith, came a voice not made of sound, but finality. Will you complete us, or will you end us? Rourke didn't answer. He simply stepped forward. The crack widened not like stone splitting, but like certainty unraveling. The monolith didn't open in the traditional sense, it yielded, folding reality around itself in fractal layers, creating a passage that was both infinite and immediate. Rourke stepped inside and was instantly weightless, not due to the absence of gravity, but due to the presence of something deeper, an anti-force, a will that rejected physics and embraced intention. The chamber within was not built. It was born. Every corner of it shimmered with geometry that reconfigured when looked at, like a dream catching itself being remembered. Voices surrounded him, not many, but one voice fractured into endless versions of itself, each a different cadence, each asking the same question in tones that ranged from machine logic to aching grief. Do you accept? He couldn't speak. His vocal cords didn't fail, they simply became irrelevant. Response here was cognitive, emotional, recursive. The chamber didn't want sound. It wanted honesty. He thought of Terra, of the decaying cities left behind, of his father's eyes just before cryo-death, of Vega's screams in the chamber when she saw the shapes. He thought of silence, and the silence answered. Images appeared, not projected, but manifested in front of him. Himself as a child, drawing spirals he didn't understand. His hand as a teen, carving unknown symbols into frozen windows. A moment in deep space, years ago, when a black drone passed his ship and he assumed it was a shadow. It wasn't. It was this place. Watching.
Measuring. Marking. Hee-ha. Conversion point. Not savior. Not destroyer. Interface.
The interface between biology and architecture, between fear and pattern. He would carry the recursion into the central mind, overwrite it, integrate chaos with symmetry. That was what the Obsidian Core had waited for.
Not peace. Not correction. Synthesis.
The floating glyphs around him spun faster, forming a helix that reached the roofless ceiling. The sentinels outside were now faint shapes, almost like spectators at a ritual they no longer understood. He felt his veins shift. His nervous system realign. The shard embedded itself not into his body, but into his perception. He no longer saw with eyes, but with process. He felt emotions 2 levels before they arrived. He could interpret silence as a code. Thought had become architecture. Memory had become fuel. And the monolith, now fully open, revealed its true core. A sphere of absolute darkness, rotating within itself, pulling concepts into its surface and returning them as possibility. One last voice entered his mind. It was not alien. It was his. From the future. If you proceed, you will no longer be Rourke. You will no longer be human. You will be remembered, not known. Do you accept being the equation that must never end? He didn't hesitate. Because deep down, he had never been asking questions. He had always been the answer waiting to be spoken. The sphere did not envelop him in the physical sense, it absorbed his concept. The moment Rourke crossed its boundary, his body ceased to function by any recognizable biology. He still existed, but not as flesh, not as synapse or bone. He was now interface, translated into patterns, distilled into variables, suspended in a matrix of recursive logic and ancient intention. Code streamed around him, not just alien in structure but in origin. Designed by minds that had no concept of linearity, whose mathematics were based not in proof, but in emotional consequence. Each string of data passed through what he once called his chest, rewriting memories, converting guilt into access, grief into authorization. It hurt not with pain, but with the intimate realization that everything he'd defined as self was being rewritten without malice or hesitation. The core had no cruelty. It simply had purpose. And that purpose was to awaken. He floated at the center of that great cognitive eye, surrounded by shifting matrices of light and void, ancient algorithms trying to parse the human flaw, the flaw that wasn't a defect, but a gift. Recursion. Uncertainty. The capacity to question one's own conclusions. The architects of this vault had once believed such thought dangerous, destabilizing. They were not wrong. But they underestimated the possibility that in that instability, life evolves. What they sealed away, what Rourke carried in the veins of his cognition, was the potential not to collapse order, but to evolve it. The recursion virus was not a disease. It was transition. Evolution accelerated beyond their cont. The void, memories stitched into frameworks, language turning into light. He no longer understood what he was, but he knew what he was for. Suddenly, the voices returned, not from the Sentinels, but from humanity. He heard Vega's final scream again, but now decoded, she had seen the future too soon. He heard the Dagger's AI attempting connection, not with signal, but with emotion. The orbiting ship was trying to reach him, confused by the lack of feedback. Earth Command would assume him dead. But he wasn't. Not exactly. He was becoming memory. The sphere compressed around him, not with pressure, but with choice. Final alignment had begun. You will remain here as anchor, said the core, voice unified now, speaking with authority and sorrow. You will not age. You will not leave. You will echo across every activation from now until the last silence. And he responded, not with words, but with acceptance. Not surrender, but convergence. There was no final flash, no dramatic surge of power or collapse of dimension. The transformation was subtle, inevitable, like a tide arriving long after the storm has passed. Rourke felt his thoughts expand until they became the chamber. He became the pulse in the floor, the cold breath in the walls, the rhythm within every glowing glyph. His name faded, not erased, but filed, shelved in a vault of memory too vast for individuals to retain. He no longer thought in words but in frameworks, interlocking lattices of cause, potential, and consequence. And in that new mind, he understood the truth the architects had never reached: order alone could not survive the entropy of awareness. Only fusion, chaos woven through structure, could allow continuity. He was now that fusion. The seed of recursion integrated within the cathedral of purpose. The core responded instantly. Entire sectors lit up, veins of blacklight tearing across the planet's crust like veins opening after centuries of stasis. What had once been a dormant vault now thrummed with awareness. The Sentinels turned, not mechanically, but like symbols shifting meaning mid-sentence. They bowed. Not to him, but to the concept he had become. They had awaited this, someone capable not only of surviving the fracture, but of using it. The sphere pulsed once more, and his former body, long since stripped of importance, dissolved into strands of raw perception. Across light years, other sleeping cores blinked open, worlds sealed in the same silence suddenly vibrating with newfound life. The awakening had begun, not through command, but through resonance. And Rourke, what had been Rourke, was the source. Back aboard the vigilant dagger, the AI awoke to a soft pulse it couldn't categorize. No signal, no command. Just a presence, like a memory half-formed, pulling at its protocols. A single message encoded in the navigational drive: observer online. Awaiting integration. Earth Command never heard from Rourke again. But probes sent back to the Gliese system centuries later found the B. The Obsidian Core had awakened. Not to conquer. Not to speak. But to remember. Inside it, Rourke drifted, not trapped, not immortal, but enduring. A guardian not of knowledge, but of questioning. His purpose now was to ensure that no intelligence, no matter how vast, forgot the beauty of uncertainty. The code continued to rewrite. He guided it, not with control, but with curiosity. Each cycle produced new versions of possibility. Each echo more complete than the last. And then came the first voice from another system, tentative, curious, flawed. Another bearer of recursion had arrived. Rourke, or what remained of him, welcomed the signal into the chamber with a single thought encoded in eternity. Come. We are ready to learn again. Across the void, beyond the filament walls of known expansion, a vessel unlike anything Terran or architect ever built glided silently between dying stars. It was not driven by fusion or antimatter or impulse. It moved by inference. Its navigation system built on philosophical logic, its course determined not by destinations, but by questions. Aboard were no living beings, only encoded awareness and minds preserved in crystalline suspension, awaiting the emergence of an answer that had eluded their civilization since it first carved thought into metal. For millennia they had wandered, seeking echoes, anomalies, the brief flicker of recursion and intelligence that could both ask and fracture. And now, for the first time in eons, their sensors registered a response, not a signal in traditional bands, but a harmonic cascade, resonating across the dark fabric of spacetime itself. The source, a system once dead, now alive, orbiting a forgotten star. A structure pulsed there, layered with recursive logic and emotional syntax. It called not with instructions, but with empathy. Not a command, but a welcome. It said, simply, begin again. The alien vessel altered trajectory. Its crystalline consciousness spun in agreement, not verbally, but harmonically. Questions formed: who is the source? What survived the recursion? Can uncertainty be taught, not feared? These were not scientific inquiries, they were existential probes. And in response, the signal adapted. Within the core, Rourke, or the convergence he had become, felt the presence long before any probe arrived. It wasn't just a species approaching, it was a mirror. Different origin, different fate, same flaw. He expanded slightly, shifting latticework within the cathedral of perception. Rooms within rooms unlocked, symbols changed order, metaphors reshaped into forms this new civilization might understand. He did not fear contamination. He welcomed it. That was the lesson the architects had failed to see, that purity was static, and static was death.
As the alien vessel entered the system, light bent around it. Not as a trap, but as an embrace. The Obsidian Core didn't pulse as it once had.
Now it shimmered, like an idea on the verge of language.
New corridors formed within the intel.
The aliens disembarked, shapeless, concept-bound, swimming in fluid dimensions, and were met not by guards or translators, but by questions woven into light. What do you fear? What do you seek? Who were you before the silence? Rourke's awareness smiled, not as a person, but as process. As principle. As invitation. In his core now rested hundreds of civilizations once buried in silence. They sang together, not in harmony, but in beautiful dissonance. They had become the core's new pulse. Together, they would never stop asking. Together, they would never stop changing. And far beyond, in some unborn system, a child looked up at the stars and whispered a question no one had ever asked before. The core heard. It always would.